T minus 50 seconds. T minus 40 seconds. T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Are we live now, Yash?
Yes, we are live. I can see participants incoming. So
Yeah.
we'll wait for just quick 30 seconds to boost up the participation. We know you all must have been waiting for our keynote talk of the event. We are also really excited to have our guest of honor with us.
So shall I am starting, okay? Yeah. So good evening, Electrothon, NITH, everyone present here. I, Rishabh and Yash, organizers of Electrothon, welcome you all on this great evening. Life is short. We can live it lost in thought, or we can choose to be present as life unfold around us. With these motivating lines by one and only Miss Miri Rodriguez, Team Spec, NIT Hamirpur, and all Electrothon participants, welcome a storyteller, a motivator, a writer, a global head, an alchemist, and a woman in tech who played an important role in transforming the way you and I tell stories. So it's an honor for us to welcome Ms. Miri Rodriguez, a globally recognized storyteller at Microsoft and the author of book Brand Storytelling.
So she has completed her master's degree in communication and media studies in 2019 from Georgetown University. She is an award-winning creative journalist, two-time participant in Microsoft's My Skills for Africa program, a volunteer business consultant, a brand coach, and whatnot. She has earned several awards in digital marketing and customer experience, and is ranked as a top in demand speaker at leading industry conferences around the world. Maybe that's why we also got her for our event. So, according to her, story is not just a story, it is a strategy to connect with businesses and customers and other people. Story is what you believe that shares your experiences and ideas with others. We as humans all are natural storytellers, but it just takes a thought to realize that and to implement the thing which we want to tell in our stories.
So, with a mission to educate and inspire engineers on designing distinctive narratives that help define and drive immersive and emotional customer engagement experience, while navigating the uncertainties of digital age, Miri also executes the four pillar at Microsoft to help the tech giant humanize this brand.
So her book Brand Storytelling has inspired millions and millions of people and enlightened a large group of people around the world. Her allegory alchemy turns story words into story worlds. Can you realize that? We turn words into world. Our imagination just can't stop pouring in. And storytellers into story lords. We have heard of many storytellers. There are many storytellers we have read about in our history books, in our English literature, everywhere. But what the important thing is how they can convert themselves into story lords. And this can be done by sharing practical tools, for which we have ma'am with us, who will share her experience, her idea of storytelling with all of us. We
So,
welcome you,
without
ma'am.
wasting any time, let's welcome one and only Miss Miri Rodriguez.
Wow, what a great introduction. Thank you so much, boys, for having me here. I'm so excited. Thank you for this honor. We were just talking a little bit backstage about the work that you've been doing in the hackathon. It's been amazing that you're now international, that you're bringing so many people from parts around the world. This is so exciting. So I'm really honored to be part of this and also to share, as you said, the storytelling alchemy. You know, when you work on something incredible, such a product or a service, a hack, an app, how do you pitch that? How do you tell people why this is important? I mean, Rishab, you were talking about you won the first hackathon, and I was asking you how, you know, what that was. Can you tell me a little bit about that first service that you created for blind people?
Yes, ma'am. So I think we can start with the presentation. People are pouring in with comments.
All right, let's do it. So for me, it's really incredible to think about storytelling as not only, you know, a communication tool or marketing tool. It really isn't that. It is more than that. It's really driving empathy and human ingenuity, all the things that we are. I love the session of this talk. It says what leads and propels the world are not machines. It's actually ideas. And the reality is the machines are here, right? The machines are here. They're here to stay. We're automating things. The robots are in. You know, there's AI. There's an intelligent edge, intelligent cloud. Everything is digital. And now, even with COVID-19, with the global pandemic, it even forced the digital age even more. Companies that were still thinking about their digital transformation have had to go digital. And so when you think about that phenomenon, about how accelerated the digital transformation has become for us, where does that leave us in the human space when the robots are cohabitating with us, when the machines are here? Where does that leave our human ingenuity and our empathy? Innovation, you know, I believe it's at the cradle of both these things, of empathy and human ingenuity. And when I went to do this work of storytelling in core services engineering at Microsoft, it was daunting. You know, it was for me something that I had never done before. And when I stepped into the space to understand what digital transformation really meant for a company as large as Microsoft, a global company, and how we were going to go tell that story in a way that was compelling, it was very daunting. And I can imagine for you as a hacker, when you think of your ideas, when you ideate, when you have a concept in your mind, and you begin to work on that and you put that code in, how do you think about empathy in that space? How are you coding empathy into that space, into the technology? Because the reality is the robots are going to go do what we tell it to do. Right? Code is going to do what we tell it to do. The algorithm is going to work the way that we code it. So how do we code the human genome in there? How do we code ingenuity and empathy into the technology that we're seeing today? How do we take all these numbers and data and algorithms and communication tools, and how do we turn that into something that as humans will remain the fabric of who we are at the core, at the level of who we are? And that's through what I like to call storytelling, but truly through a model that I had to implement in my own space of storytelling. Before I became a storyteller, I was finishing my master's, and I was thinking about, really thinking about design thinking as a model that I could implement. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this model, design thinking. For me, what it became was a true tested approach to how we encode empathy into everything that we do. I did this in story because I found out I'm not empathetic, by the way, at all. That's not part of who I am. And I first thought that being empathetic was a personality trait only. And then I learned when Satya Nadella came on board and he talked about leading with empathy, coding with empathy, managing business, hacking with empathy, that actually is an action, it's a skill set. And if you look at the design thinking approach, it actually begins, it's a cycle, begins and ends with empathy. And that was important to think about. For me, it was like, well, how do I do that, right? How do I think about stories? How do I think about products and services? How do I think about something I've built and created and start with empathy? I began to learn about empathy as a skill set, as something that you and I can practice and become. I learned there's 3 levels of empathy. So the first one is here, it's cognitive empathy. This idea that all of us are human, right? Somebody invented the car as a machine. Somebody hacked that. Somebody said, hey, you know what, we need this machine to work. And the reality is, even the modern car today, the modern machine, it's not as empathetic to its audiences as it should be. It's built mainly and tested on a large male size dummy for crash. And that means that 50% of the population or more that are smaller, typically women, elderly people, don't fit that mold, they're not going to test well in a crash, for a machine like a car. And so even to this day, we see the ramifications, if you will, of machines that have built without empathy, without looking at us all together at the cognitive empathy level and say, we're all human. When I build this, am I thinking about the humans, or am I just thinking about the solution without thinking about cognitively me in the center? Who are all these humans who are around me, who this is going to land in? That is thinking about not just the machines. The robots are going to do what we tell it to do. What we want to do is keep our humanity through our empathy. The next level is emotional empathy. It's really thinking about a little deeper. What are those emotions that drive us as humans? We're all human. Not only is my audience or my end user human, I'm also human, right? I get to step in not only as a coder or a data scientist or a really great, physicist, or however you want to step into the space as an expert or as a thought leader. Beyond that, you level off with your audience. You say, you know what? How do I understand your space better? How do I know what's happening in your space so that when I land my project, when I land my hack, it lands in the best way possible? Especially today, right? We've been going through so much stuff at the emotional level. All of us, you and I, have been impacted by a global pandemic. What does that look like? What does that impact look like? I can't pretend to know your lived experience. We've all been impacted for sure, but some of us more than others. Some of us have even gotten sick or have lost someone to the disease. So when you think about emotional empathy, it's giving it a little bit more deeper thought on who you're landing this project for, and who will it, and why, and how it can best land in today's climate. And then the last level of empathy is compassionate empathy. It's really thinking about yourself, right? It's this practice of looking introspectively and going, how am I feeling in this whole thing? Why am I doing? Go back to your why, right? A lot of times we think about solutions, hacks and solutions, and we see an immediate need and it's like, oh, that's perfectly, that's great. I'm going to, it's from the top down. There's a gap. I'm going to go fix it. We're fixers. We're solution solvers, right? But if we step back a little bit and go kind of reverse engineer the whole thing and go from the bottom up, we can also think about what created that gap. What else is there that I'm missing? Can there be more? Right? And that takes compassion and empathy. That takes introspection. It's this idea of you saying, hey, not only am I a problem solver or a coder, I'm also a human. I bring different aspects of who I am, right? Just the code doesn't define me, or the bug solver doesn't define me. That's a part of me, but there's other pieces of me that I can bring to the space. That is compassion and empathy. And so in storytelling, which is what I do professionally, we've taken this approach of story so that you can also tell the story from a different perspective. You can explain your why. You can say, this is why I built this. This is why this is important. You can pitch it to people. You can say why the solution works, or why it has such, reach or engagement, why it needs to be part of someone's business, for example. And that's done through what I call a universal truth. When I began to think about our story at Microsoft, right? When Satya came in as our CEO, he changed our brand mission. It used to be a PC on every desk in every home, very solution driven. A PC on every desk in every home solves problems, right? And we did that for 40 years. But then, as the Facebooks and the Amazons and the Googles of the world came in, we had to think differently, right? And so our story shifted. Our story became to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. What does that mean, right? What is our truth? Our truth is empowerment. Empowerment is an emotion. It's also our history, because we did empower the world with the PC, but empowerment is a feeling. You and I need to know what it feels like or not to be empowered. So empowerment is an active truth, right? It's what we want to go do for the world. What is your word? What is your solution? What is that feeling? Ask yourself, what feeling is my story, is my hack, it's my solution going to spark? Beyond the actual solution, how does it leave people feeling? That's important. Because in the brand story, Maya Angelou said it best. People won't remember what you did, so they won't remember your code. What you said, they'll remember how you made them feel, right? And when we think about Microsoft as a corporation, I've seen the transformation. I've been there 8.5 years, and I've seen in the last 6 years what that looks like. I've seen a tech company, a giant tech company, turn into a cultural movement. We have shifted our approach just with that word in the universal truth, empowerment. That's what it does, right? That's what a truth does. So think about your truth. What is that? Go back to your why. Why is this important for you to do? Is it just to find a solution? It's not good enough, right? Solutions are not good enough. It's what it's going to go do for the world. And so define that. The second step after empathy in the story, in your story and your why, is to define. Define your story mission. Again, what is it going to do? Who is it for? Why? And what is it going to make them feel? Your audience, who are they? Back to that empathy. Who is your audience? Can you get a little deeper into what they're feeling, into the demographics and the psychographics and the geography of your audience? The characters, who are you in the story of hack or product and service? Who are they? What is that hack? Is that a character as well? What is the plot? How did you get there? What's important to you? How did you build that? And for what? The conclusion, right? Looks a little bit like this. Ideation, for example, is the next step. It looks a little bit like you thinking through every step of your audience, your character, your plot, your conclusion, and you delve deeper. You brainstorm what that looks like, right? That's where we move away from robots. Robots can't brainstorm, right? They can code and they can think because you're giving them something to think about, but they can't just ideate out of nowhere, right? You have to give them code so they can do that. They have to have an algorithm. We can do that. Humans can ideate out of nowhere. We can create a white space and go, what do we do next? We can create. We are creators. And that's what makes us different, right? That's the difference between robots and us. So here you have a tool called Scamper that I use a lot. Maybe you want to use it in your hack. Submit your hack through Scamper. Ideate and say, hey, it's an acronym, as you can see here. What if I substituted something? What if I combined, adapted, modified? What if I put something to another use? Give your hack, give your ideas, give your why another layer. That makes it inclusive. That makes it think a little bit more. If somebody who had built the car or, ideated the car had submitted it through Scamper, probably they would have arrived at the fact that women were going to drive the car too. You know what I mean? Or even today, like, hey, women are driving the car. How do we ideate better for 50% of that audience, right? That makes inclusive design. That makes empathetic coding at the design level. And that's what design thinking does. And that's what story does. When we think of the storyline of how our products and services land through people, and you prototype, right? I mean, right now a hack is a prototype. So you're doing a lot of that right now. You know what I'm talking about. These are concepts. These are ideas that turn into actual viable concepts. You know that very well. So how do you turn those concepts into a journey, right? How do you design the story so that when you present this to someone, when it becomes, an actual viable product, you can say, here's my why. Not just here's the solution, it's here's why I built that solution. Here's why it's important to me. I was talking backstage and I asked what their hack was, and it was a solution for blind people. And now I'm curious to know why that's important for you. Blind people became your audience. How come? Is there someone in your family who's blind? Were you blind? How did you think about the solution for the blind? Why are the blind important to you? Right? That's the story. That's what makes it compelling, and that's what grabs people's attention. Today in my research that I did for my book, I learned that people no longer buy a product or service for the solution alone. They buy the experience and they buy the aftermath. They want to fund something beyond themselves. They want to know that if they're spending money on a solution, they're not only spending money on that solution, they're spending money on what the brand stands for, right? So if I were to buy that app for the blind, I know not only am I buying the app, I'm helping someone else because I bought the app. So that's exactly what that concept is of prototyping for better, prototyping with empathy, right? And then testing it, right? Testing it in the market. Test your solutions, test your ideas, test your story with your audiences. Pitch it over and over again until you know and you have that conclusion of like, hey, did the hack evoke that emotion that I wanted from the audience? At Microsoft, we have, 12-year-old Xbox players and we have 50-year-old cloud services engineers. how do we empower a 12-year-old and a 50-year-old at the same time with different services? It's easy because we understand that empowerment looks different to all of our audiences. It's not one size fits all. So think about your emotion. Think about what you're going to be to them, that universal truth. Who is your audience? Is it a hybrid audience? Is it an expert audience? Is it a novice audience? The way you deliver that is with empathy, and you ask, what is that emotion again? In storytelling, when you think about the elements of story, it's character, plot, and conclusion. That's what makes a story. In every story, in every story, those three elements bring everything together, right? So if I stand here and I say, here's my solution, here's my hack, that's not a story. That's just a solution. But if you say, hey, listen, I was thinking about the solution because, my mother's blind and I seen her trip around the house and fall. Okay, now you're building a story. And for me, it was really important that my mom never fell again. As I honor my mother. I don't want to see her falling and tripping. It was really, it was really compelling to me. Wow, now I have a story, right? And the conclusion is that not only my mom, but many other mothers around the world can benefit from this solution. Now you have a story. So if it doesn't have a character, plot, and conclusion, it's not a story. More so, it's not a compelling brand story for your solution. It'll just be at that level, at the hack level. So stories are built not just for your audience, they're not to your audience, they're for your audience. Meaning you're going to exert empathy, authenticity into that hack. You're going to code empathy, if you will. You're going to ideate until you know that solution, that hack, that story is built with authenticity, with empathy, and certainly with heart. Right? You're going out there, you're doing something, you're putting effort and time, you're putting your brain into this. Also put your heart, because that's what encodes differently than a robot ever will. That's the feel that we get when something is built with empathy. We know it as a consumer, we know it and we feel it, and then we buy it, right? So it's your turn. Go back, think about the way how to best tell the story, tell your story, how to use a model like design thinking, for example. And if you don't want to use design thinking, that's fine. Use something that enables you to think thoroughly and encode that empathy into your hack. I hope that was helpful for you, and I hope to connect with you. Thank you for having me. I don't know if we'll have questions now.
That was pretty amazing, ma'am. So I think Rishabh, you can continue.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. That was thanks for it was really inspiring one, ma'am. So, ma'am, can we have a question answer session?
Sure, of course. Let's do it.
Yeah,
So I
yes.
think
Yeah,
so
so
we have
we are
opened the
open
house
to questions.
open to questions. Yes.
Yeah,
So
yeah, you can
meanwhile,
ask
we
the
get
question.
in some questions. I would like to share one thing, ma'am. I heard about a talk in which the how the idea of touchscreen smartphones came into being. So as you said, people should target feelings while pitching their product. So in that talk, I heard that the idea of touchscreen smartphones was to create a touch feeling,
Yes.
operating something by touch. So they
Yes.
exploited that emotion, that empathy emotion of touch, and created a market which was inexistent until the evolution of touchscreen smartphones.
That's right.
So I really like the concept of targeting feelings and emotions while pitching in the product.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. That is all that drives innovation. It's definitely that empathy and that
Hmm.
creativity, for sure.
Because yes, you can make a product, but it is really important how you make people connected to that product.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yes, ma'am. So the house is open for questions.
Yes, you can ask the question from ma'am.
So, ma'am, we have first question
Okay.
from Spriya Gautam. Is it ethical to exploit empathy to get to the market?
That is a wonderful question. That is one of the best
Uh,
questions I've heard so far. I've actually been talking more and more about ethics and storytelling because it is something that we have to be careful with. There are no parameters today in ethics and storytelling where we can actually exploit. We have that possibility, and there's no guidelines around it. In marketing, in the marketing industry, we have organizations that actually build guidelines for ethics in marketing, for example, for consumers. It's a marketing transaction, a sale transaction. It has to have a contract, right? A human contract that we won't exploit the consumer, that we will have those small lines that talk about why we want to sell that product or that kind of thing. Right now, as we explore empathy as a tool, it's not even yet written around the actual ethics. And so what I talk about in my book is exactly that. I talk about creating your own parameters based on your core values. What are your personal core values, and how far are you willing to go with empathy? Because it can manipulate, right? It can manipulate people the way that you go out with it. So it's important that you yourself, as a coder, as a creator, as a storyteller, you create those boundaries for yourself based on your core values today. Also, base them on your company's core values if you're working for a company. So right now, today, as I tell stories or as I build stories, I act on both. I act on Microsoft's core values as a company and also my personal. So it is not ethical to exploit empathy, because exploiting by itself means you're taking advantage of people. You're taking advantage of people's emotions, which is extremely dangerous, and definitely not the way that we want to conduct ourselves. So ideally, you would go and you would create those guidelines for yourself if they don't exist yet, for you to think about how far do you want to go with empathy, vulnerability, emotions, and even story. Those are four key things that, in a human space, we can exploit and we shouldn't exploit, because it's based on actually the heart of people. So
Yeah, I think that answered your questions, Priya. So we'll move on to the next question. It is from Mukul Thakur. How did you kickstart your career as a storyteller?
yeah, it's a great question. So I didn't know that storytellers existed. Honestly, Microsoft began to create these positions for storytellers back about maybe 6 years ago, 5 to 6 years ago. They brought a chief storyteller from the UK, and they were thinking about how to best connect with our customers at a very deep, empathetic level. No longer from a big tech company, big brand idea, but more of like, hey, let's have connected stories. So they began to hire storytellers all around Microsoft, and I saw the role and I applied. My role was not in brand, it was not in marketing, it was actually in engineering. I am not an engineer, so I was very surprised that I got the job. It was something that was new to Microsoft and new to the world. In thinking about storytellers, today we have around 4,000 storytellers all around the world at Microsoft. We serve in different spaces and functions of Microsoft, not just in marketing or communications, finance and engineering and customer service. So mine was just a stroke of luck. It was nobody went to school to be a storyteller, right? When I went to university, so it's something new. It's a new role, and that just tells you there's many new jobs that are going to happen more and more as technology begins to evolve more and more in the digital age. So I became one because there was a role, and I applied and I got it. But I was also working on storytelling for my brand, my personal brand. I was using my origin story to connect with people. So I had some experience. I'm also a communications major. I had some experience in writing. I had some experience in telling stories. I had never done it professionally. So that was a stroke of luck.
Yeah, that was really a wonderful answer, ma'am. So next question is from yeah. So next question is from Harshita Jain. Do you think one's wealth plays a role in determining how empathic they are?
Oh, that's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
I actually think the opposite. I think coming from different spaces, I think empathy enables us to think about not the privileged, about the underprivileged, about people that don't have privilege, because that's how we learn from them. And so I think it's the reverse of that. I come from the slums of Venezuela. I came to the States as an immigrant. I had to learn the language. And so when I think about empathy, it's about thinking about people that were not privileged, like me. I didn't have any. I had to build myself and my career. And so now I'm empathetic to people like me that come from the slums that would probably think never work at a company like Microsoft. So I think empathy is related not to financial privilege, it's related to our human condition. When we think about social injustices, we think about the underprivileged. When we think about a global pandemic hitting the hardest in people that are of less means than people that have a lot of money, it's this disparity that we have in a human society where people that are privileged are always, uh, drawing from their own resources, but we got to be empathetic to people down here. Back to the example of the car, right? We were thinking about cars for men because men were the only ones driving at the time. But the reality is, women were also going to drive and elderly were going to drive. So it's the underprivileged or the minorities that we don't consider that empathy enables us to think about more and more. So empathy is a skill set. It's something you become more and more. You practice it. I'm not empathetic, like I said before. My kids call me cold and ruthless. So, but I've been working on it for a few years now, and I think all of us, if we think about it more and more, not from a privileged standpoint, but from a skill set as a human, we'll be better as the world turns.
Okay, I think Harshita, that answers your
That was
question.
really a great answer, ma'am. Yeah,
So we'll
Anjali,
move on to the
what's
next
yes?
question. Yes. Um, yes. So, ma'am, which is more important, the story or its language?
Ah, great question. Both. I would say both are very important. Words have power, and that's a truth. Words have the power of life or death. So language and the words that we choose to tell the story are just as important as the story itself. I can talk about a subject, but if I don't choose the right language, it won't land the best way. In storytelling, designing that story, choosing very critically and intentionally the words to use, it will compel people into the things that you want them to. That is the truth. So I spend a lot of time actually building that language. When I learned storytelling for engineers, I'm not an engineer. I had to learn the engineer language, right? I thought I knew, but I didn't know. So I had to learn their language. I had to use words that made sense to engineers. Code words. They use a lot of acronyms. So I had to use the acronyms. I had to use, they like to read bullet points. Like, hey, give me the quick bullet points. I had to learn to do that because I didn't know that. So language is as important as story, and both are combined to deliver to your audience what you need. So study both. Both are very important.
Okay, ma'am. Now, I
That's
think we
great.
have questions from other than engineering students as well. So we'll
Okay.
take up last two questions. I am popping the second last one. So, what is the role of empathy in life of a doctor?
Wow, Harsh. That's a great question. I don't know that I can answer from a doctor perspective. I am not a doctor, but I'm a patient, right? I go to the doctor. And so I have been to doctors where I'll give you a personal story. I have a condition where it's been a recurring condition, a chronic condition that I've been dealing with for the last 3 years. And the first two doctors that saw me for my condition immediately just looked at my symptoms and said, well, let's just find a solution quickly. And I didn't feel that they were empathetic toward me. I didn't feel they were asking me the right questions. I felt that they were just going immediately for, here's your symptom, here's how we're going to treat it, and that's it. I wanted to be heard. I wanted to find out if that was the only person going through something like this. I wanted to know if there was more that they could do for me. So the first two doctors, I did not, I fired them as doctors. And then I went to a third doctor who was a homeopathic doctor, and she asked all the right questions. And she said, "Hey, Miri, let's look at everything. Let's look at blood work. Let's look at all these things." And it turned out, her treatment really did help me. And the solution that the other doctors were giving me were not the right solutions. So I think empathy in the life of a doctor is just like engineers. Doctors, study something. They're built in their brains to, as scientists, to look at the problem and then treat the problem. But we have to step back, as I said, in the cognitive empathy and say, this is not just a patient, they're a human, right? There's a human right here. My patient is a human. So treat them like a human. Understand why they came to you. There's more to my condition than just, functionality. So in my condition, it was about stress. It was not my body was not functioning. So they were trying to fix something that was not true. It was my stress they had to fix, if that makes sense. But they wouldn't have gotten to that solution had they not asked me more and more, hey, how have you been dealing with this? Are you stressed out? Hey, what's happening to you? So empathy plays a big role in managing people's conditions and symptoms and getting not to the solution, but understanding the cause. And I think that's very important. And I think that's with everything, not just with doctors.
Okay, ma'am, that's really a wonderful answer. So, ma'am, one more question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Students are really excited.
That's
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
so honored.
Next question. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Vishal Sharma. So, ma'am, what do you think will be impact of including empathy as a subject of for engineering students?
I
Yes, ma'am.
hope that we begin to talk more about empathy in UX, in design thinking. I believe it's critical. I'm not important. It's critical. The impact of doing that will change inherently our technology for the good, for the better. We already think about technology for good. We think about AI for good. We think about how to better, that's what technology does. It betters the world. But the reality is that as we peel the layers of our humanity, there is intersectionality to who we are, right? If we say, well, this technology is both for men and women, then we're being inclusive. Well, no, when you peel layers of men and layers of women, there's so much more to what women look like and what men look like and how that technology will affect or impact them. So empathy enables us to do that. It enables us to think through more and more at the obvious strands of things that will happen in the future. And so I hope that for engineering, for example, at Microsoft, we talk a lot about that with our students. We bring them in. We have a space where we talk about live your best Microsoft
Yes.
life, and we talk about these engineers building with empathy, leading with empathy as a skill set. And you should know, actually, last year LinkedIn came out with an annual report right before COVID hit in January, and it actually talked about, they do this every year, and the report last year was around empathy being the number one theme of brands, meaning companies, and employees who want to work for the brand. What that means is, the thread here is, if I want to get hired at a big company, a big tech company, I also have to show empathy as a skill set, not just my coding, but also my empathy will be both, rated in the way that I drive myself. And likely the same thing, you're going to want to work for a company that is empathetic, that through a company that helps you through a global pandemic because it's empathetic to its employees. So empathy is no longer a nice to have, it's a must have. It's a skill set that I really believe will be critical in the years to come as we build more and more technology.
Yes, ma'am. That's really great, ma'am. So, yes, are we having time, or we can?
It's up to ma'am. If she allows us to take up more questions, we have a hell lot of questions. We have a lot of questions.
Okay, let's take two more.
Okay, so we have one from Akash Gupta. From a business perspective, being ruthless is
Yeah.
important. So,
It
how do
is.
we balance it in terms of empathy and
Yeah,
ruthlessness?
I have no problem being ruthless. It's very natural to me. So I do business well. But to think about being ruthless, it's really defining when and where, right? The space for business is when to be ruthless, when to have a contract. And we talk about that a lot, reminding ourselves that the business contracts are made with humans. At the end of that transaction, you're transacting with a human. So while there are contracts to upkeep at a business level, and you talk through those terms, you negotiate those terms, in the end, you're doing business human to human. So the balance here is, at the contract level, and when you're going to exercise that business contract, you keep true to that, right, at the contract level. But also with empathy, understand that that contract is being made with a human. How does that work practically? Well, when I hire someone for a business, I expect them to deliver, right? That's why they're hired. I pay them to deliver the business. If they don't deliver, obviously by contract I can fire them, I can get my money back, there's so many things that the contract will say. However, if I bring empathy to the business, I can stop for a minute, instead of going, hey, I'm going to fire you because you didn't do your job. I can go, hey, what happened? How come you didn't do the job? What's going on? Why didn't you adhere to your side of the contract? And so that humanity is built, and that relationship is built, and you can choose when and where. I mean, there's obviously place and moments for each and both, and you have to have that balance. And I think from a leadership perspective, it's an intuitive approach to how you're going to drive that balance with people you do business with. There's people that don't, that have done it twice and they don't deserve a second chance, maybe, I don't know. But there's other people that maybe they were going through something, their business was suffering because of COVID. There's humanity involved that we need to consider always.
So, I think that answers your question, Akash.
I
I
hope it does.
hope you agree with what ma'am says. So, Rishabh, we can take the last question up.
Yeah, one question, ma'am. I am also having one question, ma'am. Is there any difference between a story maker and a storyteller? Actually, I
Oh
heard
yeah.
both the terms in the industry. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, when people think storytelling, it's a lot of misconceptions around storytelling, by the way, today, which I hope we get to diffuse as time goes by. Storytelling is not marketing, it's not communication, it's not, it's not anything more than a true connection point between humans, using that very cognitive approach that we all have to tell stories. We are all storytellers. We sit and have coffee with our friends and tea, and we tell stories. We That's just natural to us. You ask a child, how was your day? They'll tell you a story, right? That's how we communicate. We've always done it. What I think is different is
Yes, ma'am.
people that are actually not telling stories, they're designing the stories with intention, thinking about their audiences, thinking about the why, thinking about the universal truth. That is a story designer, is what I call the story lord, and not just a storyteller. All of us are storytellers, in our own different rights. But truly, what makes a remarkable story lord is someone who's going to design the story, think about their audience ahead of time, think about that universal truth, think about the emotions, and really, design it like you would a product. Think about the user experience, if you will, of that story.
So
So this is why I think so many companies have taglines like "I'm loving it" and "Innovation and You."
yeah,
The "You"
That's
word
right.
defines how the brand is connected to the people who are using that brand.
That's right. Exactly.
So this was a great session, ma'am. It was really intriguing to see how technology can go along with the emotions in the customers as well as the company makers.
Yes, thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me speak a little bit about how important empathy is, how the robots won't have that, they won't have hearts, they won't have ingenuity. We get to do that, so we
yes,
get to insert
definitely.
that into the robots. So thank you for having me. I wish you all the best of luck in this hack. I know you're going to do more tomorrow, so best of luck. Keep your emotions high and your hacks good and bug free, but also insert empathy into your hacks. That's very important.
Sure,
Yes,
ma'am.
yes, ma'am.
I
Thanks a
believe my
lot, ma'am.
participants have got the message.
Thank you for
So
having me.
I'm gonna end the
Thanks a lot.
broadcast. It was